Random House Audio presents The Vanishing of Katharina Linden by Helen Grant, read for you by Justine Eyre. Chapter 1. My life might have been so different had I not been known as the girl whose grandmother exploded, and had I not been born in Bad Münstereifel. If we had lived in the city, well, I'm not saying the event would have gone unnoticed, but the fuss would probably only have lasted a week before public interest moved elsewhere. Besides, in a city you are anonymous. The chances of being picked out as Crystal Colvenbach's granddaughter would be virtually zero. But in a small town, well, small towns everywhere are rife with gossip, but in Germany they raise it to an art form. I remember my hometown as a place with a powerful sense of community, which was sometimes comforting and sometimes stifling. The passing of the seasons was marked by festivals that the whole town attended: Carnival in February, the Cherry Fair in the summer, the St. Martin's Day procession in November. At each one I saw the same faces, our neighbours from the Heisterbackerstrasse, the parents who gathered at the school gate every lunchtime, the ladies who served in the local bakery. If my family went out to dinner in the evening, we were quite likely to be served by the woman my mother had chatted to in the post office that morning, and at the next table would be the family from across the street. It would take real ingenuity to keep anything secret in a place like that, or so everyone thought. Looking back on that year, those were innocent days, a time when my mother cheerfully allowed me, at the tender age of 10, to roam the town unsupervised, a time when parents let their children out to play without once entertaining the horrific notion that they might not return home again. That came later, of course. My own problems began with my grandmother's death. A sensation at the time, it should by rights have been forgotten when the true horrors of the following year unfolded. But when it became clear that some malevolent force was at work in the town, public opinion looked back and marked Oma Crystal's death as the harbinger of doom. A sign. What was really unfair about the whole thing was that Oma Crystal hadn't so much exploded as spontaneously combusted. But gossip is Baron Munchausen's little sister, and never lets the truth get in the way of a good story. To hear the tale retold on the streets of Bad Münstereifel, and especially in the playground of the Grundschule, which I was attending at the time, you would have thought my grandmother went off like a blaze in a Chinese fireworks factory, filling the air with cracks and pops and dazzling flares of coloured light. But I was there. I saw it happen with my own eyes. Chapter 2. It was Sunday, December 20, 1998, a date that will be forever marked in my mental history. The last Sunday before Christmas, the day we were to light the last candle on the Advent crown, the last day of my grandmother's life, and, as it turned out, the last time the Colvenbach family would ever celebrate Advent. My mother, who at that time was one of only 3 British citizens living in Bad Münstereifel, had never quite come to grips with German Christmas customs. She usually forgot about the Advent crown until the first Sunday was upon us, and the only ones left were tatty, lopsided efforts stacked up outside the supermarket on the edge of town. This year's crown was a sad-looking affair, with 4 improbable blue candles squatting uncomfortably on a ring of artificial greenery. Oma Crystal took one look and marched off to get a proper one. The one she bought was a beauty, a big coronet of dark green foliage interwoven with crimson and gold ribbons and decorated with tiny Christmas baubles. Oma Crystal carried it into our dining room as ceremoniously as though it had been a jar of frankincense for the infant Jesus himself, and set it down in the middle of the table. My mother's crown, with the unseasonal blue candles, was relegated to the sideboard, and eventually, still unlit, to the trash. If my mother had any opinion about this, she did not express it other than by a slight tightening of the upper lip. That Sunday a special dinner was being planned. As well as Oma Crystal, we were also expecting my father's brother, Uncle Thomas, Tante Brita, and my cousins Michael and Simon, who'd all travelled down from Hanover. My mother, who normally had a robust attitude toward German housekeeping, had worked herself up into a state of frenzy over the cooking and cleaning. Our house was one of those old traditional Eiffel houses, constructed of a kind of half-timbering called Fachwerk, wildly picturesque to look at, Such buildings are low and dark inside, with tiny windows that admit only the stingiest amount of daylight and make the cleanest rooms look dingy. The menu proved to be an equal source of stress. Uncle Thomas was a man of very plain tastes and would as soon have thought of eating witchetty grubs as something non-German. My mother tormented my father a little beforehand with threats to serve up curry and chips, but in the end the prospect of Uncle Thomas pushing the dinner around the plate with a fork like a pathologist investigating a stool sample was simply too much. She determined to make Gänsebraten, roast goose with a stuffing of leberwurst, muttering, "Anything with leberwurst in it is sure to be a hit with Thomas and Brita." While my mother was putting the finishing touches to the goose and my father was uncorking the wine, Uncle Thomas and his family arrived. Uncle Thomas almost blotted out the light as he came through the front door, his shoulders filling the frame. Tante Brita, a tiny woman with stick-like limbs and a bird-like swiftness in her manner, followed him, and behind her came Michael and Simon. In Germany, it is considered proper that a child should go and shake hands when meeting someone. I hated doing this and hung back, but Omar Crystal pushed me forward with a well-timed poke in the back. Reluctantly, I held out my hand to Uncle Thomas, who unfolded it in his enormous fleshy paw. "Hallo, Pia." "Hallo, Uncle Thomas," I replied dutifully, willing him to let go of my hand so I could wipe my fingers surreptitiously on the leg of my trousers. Uncle Thomas always had clammy hands. "You've got bigger," he commented in his hearty way. I murmured, then with sudden inspiration, "I must go and help Mama in the kitchen." With some relief I escaped into the kitchen, where condensation was running down the tiny window panes, and my mother was moving about frantically through the steam, with rather the effect of someone stoking the boiler in the engine room of a steamship. She fixed me with a steely gaze. "Out," was all she said. "Mama, Uncle Thomas and Tante Brita are here." "Oh, God," was my mother's encouraging remark. She shooed me out of the kitchen and back into the living room, where I discovered Michael eating the last of the chocolates that St. Nicholas had brought me on December 6. The ensuing rumpus lasted until dinner was ready, and my mother emerged from the kitchen with a harried expression to tell us that we could take our places at the table. She regarded Michael's red face, blotchy with crying, and her upper lip tightened again, but she said nothing. Discretion is the better part of valor. She went back into the kitchen and finished carving the goose. The moment my mother announced that dinner would be imminently on the table, everyone rushed to the bathroom, Omar Crystal included. Managing without a last-minute cosmetic repair job was simply not an option with Omar Crystal, whose one overriding vice was vanity. None of us had ever seen Omar Crystal without makeup, or with her hair au naturel. The latter was always set and sprayed into a sort of glistening silver helmet. Today the hairdo had wilted slightly, because Omar Crystal had been into the kitchen several times to dispense advice about the making of glazed peaches to go with the roast. She therefore took an enormous can of hairspray, like some sort of torpedo, into the bathroom with her, as well as her bulging bag filled with expensive lipsticks and industrial-strength wrinkle removers. Omar Crystal looked good that day, as my father, Wolfgang, and his brother Thomas lugubriously agreed at the funeral. Always careful with her diet, she'd retained an elegant figure right until her old age, with slim legs encased in sheer stockings and fashionable little black leather shoes with high insteps and pointy toes. She wore a skirt of some velvety black material, unsuitably tight and undeniably chic, and a shocking pink mohair sweater cinched at the waist with a thin black belt. To her bosom, which still had a jutting appearance reminiscent of a wartime pin-up, she had attached a large diamante brooch like a medal pinned to a uniform. I like to think that, as she took her final look at herself in the big bathroom mirror, she was satisfied with what she saw. At any rate, she spent some time touching up her makeup, so that my mother was actually putting the plates on the table before Omar Crystal got to the hairspraying bit. "Omar Crystal," my mother called in a tentative voice, not liking to adopt too strident a tone toward her strong-minded mother-in-law. "Mama!" bellowed Uncle Thomas, who was less sensitive on such topics, and who was no doubt looking forward to gorging himself on the goose and leberwurst. Omar Crystal patted her hair into place, and then sprayed it with the dedication of a car mechanic giving a BMW a paint job. She managed to frost her bosom and shoulders with the stuff too, until the pink mohair was glistening with tiny droplets, and there was a
Sample complete. Ready to continue?